Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, based on whichever part of the world you are in. I'm Shubhajit Goswami from the Leprosy Mission Trust India. It's a largest leprosy-focused non-government organization in the country, which has been working on research, training, healthcare, and advocacy for those people affected by leprosy and other disabilities. On the occasion of World Leprosy Day, I have a very special guest with me, and I'm really privileged to have him with me. His name is Doug Roland. He is he is hi Doug, welcome to the show. Um, he is an independent filmmaker, but more importantly, he is a storyteller, especially for those communities who are underrepresented, who have not been talked about much, and he's based out of Brooklyn, although he hails from New York City. And the reason why we're conversing with him today is also very special. So, without further ado, Doug, I'll ask you the first question, which I've been itching to ask you ever since I watched that movie, Filling Through. Oh, before I start the discussion, I should talk about the film a bit. So, Filling Through is one of his recent movies which has won hearts of millions of people, not just in the US, but across the world. And this 18-minute short film has been an official selection in more than 25 film festivals, and it has won more than 15 awards and still counting. So you can imagine the impact this 18-minute film is doing. So once again, wonderful, wonderful to have you, Doug. And let's start with the first question, which I've been itching to ask you. So the first question is, after watching that film, my first reaction was, it's a wonderful story, but there must be some other story behind this story. And I googled it to find it out, and it occurred to me that it's based on your real life experience, which you encountered back in 2011. So for our audience, you can just Google it up and see what the story is about. And it's all there on the internet. But I am more interested in knowing, how did you find Artie or Robert? It's a wonderful discovery. How did you find him?
Yeah, so I the real life occurrence that happened to me that inspired all this happened, now about 10 years ago. But I wrote the film very shortly after it, but I didn't feel like I was quite ready to make it. So it actually just lived on my computer for a number of years before I actually started to kick up dust on it. But about 3 years ago, when I just had this very strong gut feeling that it was time to make it, I ended up um, reaching out to, through a series of fortuitous events, reaching out to the Helen Keller National Center, who's based in Long Island, to collaborate with them and to make it. Because I knew instinctively from the start that I wanted to make, at the time, I knew very little about the deafblind community. Now, 3 years into like connecting with the community and working with the community day in and day out, I know a lot more. But at the time, I still knew very little. And I knew I wanted to tell this film in the best way and make it the most authentic representation I could. So that's why I reached out to the Helen Keller National Center. They're an organization that provides independent living skills for people who are deafblind all throughout the United States. The biggest such organization in the country, in the US. And I ended up partnering with them. And part of the benefit of that was I worked with their associate executive director, who is deafblind himself as well. And he reached out to people who were deafblind all across the country, because there weren't really any deafblind actors to choose from. Because it turns out that the actor that would cast Robert Trango is the first deafblind actor to star in a film. So Chris Woodfill helped me reach out to people who are deafblind all across the country, who he thought just sounded like they'd be a good fit from the description of the character that I wanted. And we did a casting session, and it was actually really funny because we did some casting sessions up at the National Center in Long Island. Some people were there in person, some we did remotely through a network of interpreters. But about halfway through our first day of casting, we had a break in the schedule, and Robert was not on our schedule. He actually worked at the time in the kitchen at Helen Keller National Center. And someone in the room was like, hey, I think Robert would be a really good fit for this. So Robert, before Robert knows what's going on, he's like pulled out of the kitchen. He thought he was like in trouble at first or something. He's thrown into this room. There's a camera. Someone's like, hey, this is a director. He's casting a movie. And instantly Robert started just his charisma and his sense of humor just came through, and he started cracking all these jokes. And instantly I knew like, this is our guy. So it was a very fortuitous event to be able to, have Robert walk into the room that day when he wasn't supposed to, and just instantly find who was the perfect fit for Artie.
Brilliant story. That is amazing. This is how you discover people at the least expected places, right?
Absolutely.
So this leads me to another question. Traditionally, what happens is when a filmmaker is given such a script, since here you have written this, it's another issue altogether. But since a filmmaker always tries to rope in a seasoned actor who would sort of emulate the character that is being asked to sketch out, why did you decide to go with the person who is actually deaf blind? What made you do this?
That's a great question. For me, it was actually instinct. My initial instinct was to do that even before like I started to think about it. But it's also, I'm glad that was my instinct, because also it's been a real hot button topic in Hollywood over the last few years, what we call authentic casting, like you're asking about. For so long, particularly, I mean, there's a lot of communities that have been marginalized in storytelling, but the disability community is one probably that's been more marginalized than any other community. And it also happens to be the largest minority group in the world. So it's, it's so important to, I mean, for me, again, it was instinct. I just knew from the ethos of the story that I wanted to tell, I knew that I wanted to be authentically cast. But moreover, it's so important because there's so many people with disabilities that never get the opportunity to even audition for a film, let alone be a part of it. And so many, there's so few characters that are written with disabilities in the first place. And oftentimes it's non-disabled actors that end up playing those roles. And what you get is just people with disabilities just don't get an opportunity to participate and show off their talents and live out, their desires and their dreams. And it's something where I think it's an antiquated thing that's starting to slowly dissipate, but there's so many talented people in the disability community as there is in any community. And it's time to give people with disabilities that opportunity that they deserve like anyone else. And also at the end of the day, there's an authenticity that you can't really replicate when you're talking about it being someone's lived experience also.
This is so true.
And so it really serves the story too. But, for me, it was just, I knew it needed to be that way instinctually, and then learn so much about how important it is through the journey of actually making it.
Right. I completely agree with you on that. Now, Doug, this got me thinking that generally an actor is, we heap praises on him or her by the kind of effort that he or she puts into the acting, and how deeply he or she goes into the skin of the character and internalizes the attributes, the traits and all. How different it was for Artie, because he was almost sort of playing himself.
Yeah, it was interesting because Robert, who our actor who plays Artie, he so the deafblind community is a very diverse community. Especially when blindness is a spectrum. It's not a binary thing. There's quite a lot of different manifestations of blindness. Same with deafness, quite a spectrum. So when you layer those on top of each other, you get such a diverse spectrum of manifestations of deafblindness that range from anyone who's completely deaf and completely blind to someone who has use of their sight and hearing but is legally deaf and legally blind, and anyone in between. Robert is someone who's our actor that played Artie. Robert is someone who was born deaf and started to really profoundly lose his eyesight more like in his 30s. He's now in his mid 50s. So he has, essentially like pinhole vision that's also foggy. So he still relies on his eyes if the lighting conditions are right. If he's like far enough away and like the lighting conditions are right, he is completely blind at night. So we would have to create certain lighting situations when we were shooting outside so that he could see the interpreters. But, for Robert, he did have to, because the character was written as someone who was like essentially completely blind. So he did have to learn how to not rely on his vision at all when he was acting, and make that adjustment. So, there were certain parts of the character that obviously he very much innately connected to. And then other things that were new for him to learn how to not try to use his eyesight at
Right.
all.
Right.
But he was such a hard worker, really committed to doing a great job, and he's such a great guy.
Yeah, yeah. Because when somebody watches that film, it never occurred. It will never occur to someone that Robert is doing this for the first time, and so this I'll also ask you something, Doug. So in the process of filmmaking, a filmmaker discovers a lot of things in the process, in the due course, and I think this is one of its kind film that everybody is talking about. So in the process, do you think that you have discovered something about filmmaking or working with people with special abilities?
Yeah, that's an amazing question. Obviously, like, I'm certainly not the first person to work with people with disabilities. I am maybe one of the first people to work with a deaf blind actor in a film. Again, like, as we discovered through the process, but I think that what I'm looking as I look forward to, we want to make a feature film version of this short film. And as I look forward to that, I'm looking at, having over the last few years of making and showing this film, getting to connect with so many amazing people in the disability community who have brilliant ideas. I'm looking to work with them to use the feature film production as an opportunity to create a model for what like accessible filmmaking should look like. So I would love to use that as an opportunity to do that and really demystify it for other people, make it something that is not something that, like, where there's a real clear path on like good practices of how to do it, so that people who maybe haven't worked with people with disabilities, or maybe a lot of different people with disabilities on set, we'll have more of a roadmap, and there's certainly people that have done this a lot more than me as well. So that's why I'm always learning from people around me, and would want to partner with a lot of different people to make that happen. But yeah, I'm very interested in using what we've learned and trying to make that much more wider practice for other people. And something that we have done that I think we have somewhat pioneered before the pandemic, when we were showing this film in person, we were showing it as part of this 3-part event called the Feeling Through Experience, which includes feeling through the short film we're talking about, a supporting documentary called Connecting the Dots, which actually follows the process of casting and working with Robert. We had cameras in the room the first time we met him. I'll send you a link to that as well. And then it also follows our year-long journey to track down Artemio, who's the man in real life that I had met. So I'll send that to you so you can see that. But we would play those 2 films, and then the third part would be a panel discussion and Q&A with the deafblind community, and we would involve like myself and Robert, and then anyone else, like locally, wherever we were screening, who was from the deafblind community, to have that local feel. And we made those fully accessible screening events. And when I mean fully accessible, I mean at a single screening, we might have as many as 50 interpreters and support staff to provide one-to-one accessibility for whoever needed it. We had open captions on the screen, audio description tracks available, all different types of interpreters, whether they be tactile interpreters, stage interpreters. And it was this opportunity to bring the deafblind community and the general public together to have a shared experience and learn from each other while they watched it. And I think the level of accessibility we provided to make those screenings perhaps was a first, maybe, to that degree. But a quick anecdote from that, and I think it's important to what you asked, is at the very first screening that we did, which was in Cary, North Carolina, in the United States, we had 50 interpreters and support staff. We probably had like 30 people from the deafblind community, a bunch more from the deaf and blind communities, and a lot of people from the general public. And when it got to the panel discussion and Q&A portion, one of the very first people to stand up was a man who is deafblind. And this was my first time showing it to the community. So obviously, like, I'm holding my breath a little bit because I want to make sure that I've done them right. I want to make sure they enjoy the film. So this man stood up. He'd had the entire film, both films and the panel discussion tactilely signed into his hand from an interpreter. And he says, I really loved that film. I was really moved by it. I found it really touching. And I'm so glad that it's out in the world and that Robert was able to play the character. But moreover, I'm so happy to be experiencing this film with all these other people. A lot of people, and in his words still, he says, a lot of people assume that because I'm deaf and blind, I wouldn't care to go to the movies. But I love going to the movies. I love having this shared experience. I just never have the opportunity to because it's never made accessible for me. And that was such an amazing first response to hear and like affirmation of what we were doing and light bulb moment to go, wow, like, you know, we really can't make assumptions about people who aren't going through our experience because so often they're incorrect. And here's this man who, you know, has totally totally knocked down assumptions that many people would have about someone who's deafblind. And he's like, no, I want to come out and watch a movie just like anyone else. And I thought that was such a beautiful thing to hear, you know?
Absolutely, absolutely. So this film, I reckon it's breaking out of stereotypes, you know, a lot of stereotypes that we have about people with special abilities, and we think of them that are they're languishing somewhere in some uncertain corners, and they are hidden from our public eye, and but they also have the right to have that cultural pursue whatever they like, whatever they feel. They have their hobbies, and that's, I think that is a wonderful example of quote unquote accessible filmmaking, or I should say inclusive filmmaking, if I may say so. That is a wonderful thing. I hope that the other countries also warm up to this idea of inclusive filmmaking. Not just the process, not just involving them in the filmmaking, but also making it accessible to them, because they have every right to do this and watch a movie. Uh,
Absolutely.
so so let's talk about the uh, film, the bigger message of the film. So my initial reaction to the film was that it's it's kind of asking us to look beyond disability and think about the potential of the person that he or she has. It's like moving away from the term disabled to specially abled. So was that the message that you wanted to drive home, or there was something
Yeah, I mean
else?
that's pretty accurate. Yeah, I'll say a quick anecdote in response to that. That kind of sums it up. But when I first connected with the Helen Keller National Center, and I had my first meeting with them, I told them I have a film that has a deafblind character in it that I want to be played by a deafblind actor, but it's not a film about deaf blindness. It's a film about human connection and, moreover, the power of human connection despite whatever differences we have. So that's really, you know, one character happens to be a person who's deafblind. The other character happens to be a sighted and hearing young man. But it's less about that and more about the commonality and connection that they're ultimately able to find, and moreover this mutuality and how they both have something to provide for each other. Tariq helping Artie, you know, get on the bus he needs to get home, and Artie really getting in tune with there's some Tariq needing some sort of support and affirmation and care from someone else outside of him. So they really it does in many ways break down a lot of the perceptions people have about the disability community, and that someone who's disabled is always on the receiving end of help and has nothing to offer someone else. And in
Hmm.
this case, it's not about it's about the fact that they both have their challenges, they both have their like really strong traits, and they're rounded human beings like anyone else, and they also both ultimately have something to offer each other.
Yeah. Great, great. So I won't hold you for long. Two more questions, Doug. One is, how is Robert himself? how happy he is about the film? Is he harsh on himself? Is he a very tough critic of himself, or how is he
Robert is
reacting?
absolutely over the moon with this. I mean, this guy has been on cloud nine ever since we shot this movie. He got to try. So before the pandemic, we got to do 14 of these fully accessible screenings all across the country, from New York to Hawaii and many places in between. So he traveled with me to almost all of them. And then he's done a bunch of virtual screenings with me over the pandemic. And he's just, I mean, he loved it. He wants to do it again. He wants to continue acting. And he loves every time that we do interviews, every time we do panel discussions. So he's just over the moon, and he's just like, he couldn't be happier.
Brilliant, brilliant. This is so heartwarming. This is so assuring to hear such experiences. Uh, a parting note, a parting question, Doug. Do you think this movie is one of the factors that could nudge the filmmakers around the world to be a lot more thoughtful, a lot more sensitive, a lot more empathetic, a lot more inclusive towards people with disabilities, and include them more and tell more of their stories and make them a kind of a mainstream, not just a one-off movie, but make them a part of the mainstream.
I think I think it will play a role in that for sure. I mean, I think when you have something that's that big of an endeavor, it's going to take a lot of different people and a lot of different films. But I'm optimistic that it'll play a good part in it. And I think one of the things too is, like, first and foremost, you're not going to have a lot of impact on changing people's perceptions with a film if they don't like the film. And fortunately, people have really loved the film. People have felt, really attached to the story, and really their hearts have been really invested, and they've been very moved by it. And also, very importantly, they've loved Robert's performance. They think he's so great in the film. I think those things go a long way into leading into changing other perceptions. I think when you have a good movie and people like the performance, that in and of itself carries a lot of weight, right? It's like, oh, you can make a good movie with a person with disabilities, and they can be great in it. Again, not saying we're the first ones to do that, but like, I think people who see this film, that's one of the takeaways. And then again, with the amount of opportunities we create to create discussions around this and really welcome people into the conversation and give them an opportunity to directly connect with and converse with people in the deafblind community, we hope is the other part of the work that starts to allow people to really feel a personal connection to someone from the community, and therefore start to see the community differently once they know an individual. It's the same thing with any marginalized group ever.
True, true.
If you the most dangerous thing is when you're completely separated from it and you're just operating off of what beliefs you've inherited or assumptions you have. The second you actually make a really close bond with someone, it's
Yeah.
going to change how you feel about everyone in that group, at least to some degree. And that's what we're hoping to do with, through Robert being such a part of this, through a lot of other people in the deafblind community who played such a huge role. And, we've heard many times from people that they've said that it's a life-changing experience for them to watch this film and watch the whole experience. And we hope to continue to share it with as many people as possible for that reason.
This is wonderful. This is wonderful. I just want to end this with a wish list that I have. 2 3 points. I wish I could see more of wonderful people like Artie in your films. I wish you make more such wonderful films with people like Arties, and I wish more such people with special abilities are able to see those movies, access those movies, and they feel a part of this society, and live a dignified life. Thank you
Well,
so much, Doug.
my absolute pleasure. I wish very much the same. And I will say, we have had an opportunity to have a really great connection with India, because we, at the very end of 2020, I was a featured speaker and we did a Feeling Through experience at the India Inclusion Summit, which was such a great experience. Obviously, it happened virtually. Feroz, who runs that, is an exceptional person, and so we were able to do, at least for some people in India, do an experience. And I hope one day to come out there and do one in person, and I'll certainly come and find you, and would love to connect that.
Absolutely. It will be my pleasure, Doug. It will be my pleasure. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for gifting this wonderful film. You keep doing amazing work, and I'll see you soon.
Thank you so much. My pleasure.
Thank you.